Did you know that over 40 million people use dating apps in the US alone? While many seek love and companionship, a darker reality lurks beneath the surface. For every romantic connection made, there are countless stories of chilling encounters that leave a lasting mark on those involved. Tonight, we dive into the unsettling world of online dating, where a simple swipe can lead to terrifying consequences. Join me as we explore two spine-chilling tales of dark encounters that will make you question the safety of your next match. From eerie messages that chill the soul to face-to-face meetings that spiral into nightmares, these stories reveal the hidden dangers of seeking love in a digital age. So dim the lights and prepare yourself for a journey into the shadows of the internet, where not every connection is what it seems.
Story 1. The Tinder Pyromaniac. In the heart of Denver, a city that thrived on its vibrant nightlife and bustling tech scene, Eric was a software engineer in his mid-30s, living a life of quiet routine. By day, he wrote code for a major tech company, and by night, he searched for companionship through the endless scroll of dating apps. His days were filled with lines of code and deadlines, and his nights with the flickering hope that one day he'd find someone who understood him. One autumn evening, Eric matched with a woman named Megan on Tinder. Her profile was captivating: long auburn hair, a smile that could light up a room, and a bio that mentioned her love for art and adventure. They began chatting, and Megan seemed perfect. She was witty, engaging, and shared Eric's love for classic films. After a week of exchanging messages, they decided to meet for a drink at a popular downtown bar. When Eric arrived at the bar, Megan was already there, sitting by the window with a glass of wine. She looked even more stunning in person. Her eyes sparkled with an intensity that both intrigued and unnerved him, but he brushed off the feeling. They spent the evening laughing, talking about everything from their favorite movies to the intricacies of their jobs. She was charismatic, charming, almost too good to be true. As the night drew to a close, Megan suggested they meet again the next evening, this time at Eric's apartment for a homemade dinner. Eric, eager to see her again, readily agreed. The next evening, Megan arrived at Eric's apartment, holding a bottle of wine and a small bouquet of flowers. She was dressed in a red dress that hugged her figure, and her smile was as bright as ever. They cooked together, the atmosphere warm and intimate. Everything seemed perfect until it wasn't. As they sat down to eat, Megan's demeanor began to shift. Her previously engaging smile turned into something else, something darker. She leaned in closer, her voice low and almost menacing. "You know, Eric, I've been thinking about you all day," she said, her eyes narrowing. "I couldn't stop imagining what it would be like to be with you forever." Eric chuckled nervously, unsure how to respond. He could feel the air in the room grow thicker, the shadows cast by the candlelight seeming to stretch and twist unnaturally. Megan continued to stare at him, her eyes now devoid of the warmth they had held just the night before. "I'm not like other women, Eric," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't just let people walk away from me." Unsettled, Eric tried to change the subject, but Megan was relentless. She stood up, walked around the table, and sat beside him, too close for comfort. She took his hand in hers, her grip cold and unyielding. "You can't leave me," she murmured. "We're meant to be together, Eric. Don't you see that?" Eric's heart raced as he gently pulled his hand away. "Megan, I think maybe we should slow down," he suggested, trying to keep his voice steady. but Megan's face twisted into a snarl. "No, Eric, we're not slowing down. We're just getting started." Without warning, she grabbed the bottle of wine and smashed it against the wall, the shattering glass echoing through the apartment. Eric jumped to his feet, panic setting in. "Megan, you need to leave," he demanded, trying to keep his distance. But Megan just smiled, a wicked, twisted grin. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere, Eric," she whispered, reaching into her bag and pulling out a small, metal lighter. Before Eric could react, Megan flicked the lighter and held it to the curtains. The flames caught almost instantly, spreading rapidly across the fabric. "You see, Eric," she said, her voice eerily calm amidst the growing inferno, "if I can't have you, then no one will." Eric's mind raced as the fire consumed his apartment. He ran for the door, but Megan blocked his path, her eyes wide with madness. "You're mine, Eric. You'll always be mine," she hissed, her voice distorted by the crackling flames. In a desperate bid for survival, Eric shoved Megan aside and sprinted out of the apartment, the heat of the fire scorching his back. He burst into the hallway, screaming for help as the flames roared behind him. Neighbors began to pour out of their apartments, panic spreading like the fire that was now devouring Eric's home. Outside, the fire department arrived just in time to contain the blaze before it spread to the rest of the building. Eric watched in horror as his apartment was reduced to ashes, the life he had built consumed by flames in a matter of minutes. Megan was nowhere to be found. The authorities searched for her, but it was as if she had vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but the haunting memory of that night. Days later, as Eric lay in his hospital bed, recovering from burns and smoke inhalation, he received a text message from an unknown number. It was a single sentence. "I'll find you, Eric. You can't escape me." Eric's blood ran cold. Megan was still out there, somewhere, watching, waiting, and he knew that she wouldn't stop until she had him, or until she destroyed everything he held dear. From that day on, Eric lived in fear, constantly looking over his shoulder, wondering when Megan would strike again. The flames had scarred more than just his body. They had left an indelible mark on his soul, a reminder that true evil could hide behind the most beautiful of faces. Story 2: The Digital Deception. In the sprawling city of Los Angeles, Paul was just another lonely soul trying to find love in the vast, impersonal world of online dating. As a software developer, his days were spent coding in isolation, and the quiet of his nights only deepened his sense of solitude. The endless scrolling through profiles on dating apps had become routine, a habitual search for connection that often led to nothing more than fleeting conversations. But that changed when he matched with a woman named Lauren. Her profile was a breath of fresh air, dark hair, striking green eyes, and a smile that exuded warmth. Her bio was simple, yet intriguing. Adventurer at heart, looking for someone to share the journey with. They began chatting, and Paul was immediately drawn to her. She was witty, engaging, and seemed genuinely interested in him. After a week of exchanging messages, Lauren suggested they meet for a drink at a trendy bar downtown. On the night of their date, Paul arrived at the bar early, a mix of excitement and nerves coursing through him. The place was lively, filled with the hum of conversations and the clinking of glasses. He found a table in the corner, away from the crowd, and waited for Lauren. When she finally walked in, she was even more stunning in person. Her smile lit up the room, and Paul felt his anxiety melt away as she approached. The evening started perfectly. They talked and laughed, sharing stories about their lives, their dreams, and the things that made them who they were. As the night wore on, Paul felt a connection with Lauren that he hadn't experienced in years. But as the clock ticked closer to midnight, Lauren's demeanor began to change. Her bright smile dimmed, and her laughter became more forced. Something was off, but Paul couldn't quite put his finger on it. Then, out of nowhere, Lauren suggested they move to a quieter place, a bar she knew that was just a short walk away. Paul hesitated, a knot of unease forming in his stomach, but he didn't want to seem paranoid, so he agreed, and they left the bustling bar behind. They walked through the dimly lit streets, the sounds of the city fading as they ventured into a quieter, more secluded part of town. Paul couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but Lauren kept the conversation light, distracting him with her charm. Finally, they reached the entrance of an old, run-down building. "The bar's in the basement," Lauren said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Paul's instincts screamed at him to turn back, but before he could say anything, two men appeared from the shadows. They were tall, muscular, and wore expressions of cold malice. Paul's heart pounded in his chest as they approached, their eyes fixed on him. "Paul, meet my friends," Lauren said, her voice suddenly devoid of warmth. The men grabbed Paul before he could react, their grips like iron. He struggled, panic surging through him, but it was no use. They dragged him into the building and down a narrow, dimly lit staircase. The basement was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of mold and decay. The men threw Paul onto a cold, hard floor, and Lauren stood over him, her eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. "Did you really think you could trust someone you met online?" she sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. "You're just another mark, Paul, another fool who believed in a fantasy." Paul's mind raced, trying to make sense of the betrayal. The woman he thought he had connected with was nothing more than a trap, a lure to bring him to this nightmare. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice trembling. Lauren's smile was devoid of any emotion as she crouched down beside him. "It's simple, really. Your money, your belongings, and anything else we can take from you." She reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet and phone. "And if you cooperate, maybe we'll let you go. If not, well, let's just say we've got other ways to make you talk." One of the men produced a knife, its blade glinting ominously in the dim light. Paul's blood ran cold as the man pressed the knife to his throat, the sharp edge biting into his skin. "You better listen to her," the man growled, "because we don't make empty threats." Terror seized Paul as he realized how close he was to death. He could feel the knife's cold steel, the weight of his life hanging by a thread. Desperation gave him a burst of adrenaline, and with a surge of strength, he shoved the man off balance and scrambled to his feet. He bolted for the stairs, his heart pounding in his ears, but Lauren and the other man were right behind him. Paul's lungs burned as he sprinted up the steps, the sound of footsteps closing in on him. He reached the door at the top of the stairs and flung it open, bursting out into the cold night air. He didn't stop running, didn't look back. His only thought was to escape, to survive. The streets were empty, eerily silent, as Paul ran through the maze of alleyways and side streets. He could still hear them behind him, their shouts echoing off the walls, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Finally, he spotted a group of people up ahead, and with the last of his strength, he ran toward them, shouting for help. Startled, The group turned and saw Paul, disheveled and bleeding, stumbling toward them. They quickly moved to his side, pulling him into their midst, just as Lauren and her accomplices emerged from the shadows. Realizing they were outnumbered, the trio hesitated, then melted back into the darkness. Paul collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, his body trembling from the adrenaline and fear. The group of strangers, concerned and confused, called the police, who arrived moments later. Paul was taken to the hospital, his wounds treated as he recounted the horror of what had happened to him. The police searched the area, but Lauren and her gang had vanished, leaving no trace behind. Days later, Paul received a call from the authorities. They had found the building where he was held, but it was empty, stripped of any evidence that could lead them to his attackers. Paul's sense of security was shattered. The woman he had thought was the perfect match had been a predator, using his trust and loneliness against him. The experience left him deeply scarred, a reminder that not all dangers are visible and not all connections are genuine. From that day on, Paul was never the same. The digital world that once held the promise of companionship now felt like a labyrinth of deception where shadows lurked behind every profile. He vowed never to trust so easily again, knowing that the next time he might not be so lucky.